So, this week we are returning to the game of hot dogs, horseshoes, and hand grenades, and this time we're trying something quite different from previous attempts, which is the hardcore mode, in which one can only take one shot before dying and having to restart the entirety of the take and hold game mode. One may question what makes this mode any different from any of the others, but trust me, that will all become clear very, very shortly. So if you want to know how to become the greatest, most operator character in hot dogs, horseshoes, and hand grenades and make it through the hardcore round without breaking a sweat, this is definitely the video to watch, because I was obviously, of course, very successful. So I'm not sure if it's just me or the mode itself, but one thing in particular that makes this hardcore mode different is that even when selecting the normal character, at least for me, it seemed to put me on the loot table progression of Ricky Dicky Random. Either that or I accidentally said it, but I find that kind of unlikely. Regardless, I do think that it is actually almost preferable to the standard progression and adds a little bit of excitement to things, as it will allow you to achieve getting some weapons that don't show up otherwise. This can lead to you starting a match with a crossbow. Oh, great, I don't even know how to use this, but I kind of want to just for the sake of it. Wow, that is right up in my face. This is probably the worst breaching weapon in the history of breaching. Because they can hear me coming, I only get one shot before having to manually reset the gun. It is quiet, I guess. Which you have to charge between every shot, and which has a very limited velocity, making it very difficult to use effectively. Or you can start off with something like an MG42. This is an interesting way to start. With the buzzsaw. I don't even like it that much, but I have to acknowledge the rather obscene levels of power. You literally cannot single fire with this gun. Nope. Definitely nope. God. I guess we'll keep them to trade in later. I'm gonna load this one just because that's an armor piercing 50 cal. I actually want to kill something with it, and it's early enough in the round that I feel like I could be justified to taking it for scouts. I don't know if I reloaded this or not. So. Okay, a good first round. This vast disparity in weapons that you can acquire make things quite interesting in the very beginning, and there are several times when I started off with something really bad and just didn't want to be bothered with immediately dying with it. I'm just gonna shoot myself until I get a decent gun again. So with that out of the way, I will give you a couple of tips that should be able to help you generally speaking, have a better time staying alive. Now, in the very first Hot Dogs, Horseshoes, and Hand Grenades video, I described to you how headshots are so incredibly important, and that remains true. You really need to manage to take a headshot as much as you can, as it will prevent the enemy from firing back at you, this being one of the key factors now. Before, it was just an effective way to kill them. But now, what you want to do is, in any ideal situation, you want to be able to defeat all of your enemies without a single shot having been fired from them. There's no good way to aim it, but I'll accept it. I guess that's going to likely result in death. Okay, that wasn't terrible. Any shot they fire is basically a coin flip on whether or not you have to restart the entire match. Put into that perspective, I hope it makes more sense why it's so important. You'll also, of course, want to move a good deal slower and actually check your corners. Since you have to deal with the fact that you can only be shot once, it'll make you move almost as if you would expect to be moving in real life. This will kind of have an effect on you as if it really kind of gets close to almost feeling like you're there trying to not die. This is probably going to make the game significantly scary. Of course, after you spend a good 5 hours trying to beat it, it'll start to just be a little frustrating, but it is actually quite terrifying, especially the first time or two, and honestly will have a similar effect on you as it will with horror games.
What they hear is not just a string of abstract, unrelated that,
I would say there are two main philosophies for ways to play this. The first one is to continuously spawn different weapons and amass a collection of different things that will hopefully be able to have the ability to serve a purpose in every situation. A shotgun for the encryption points, an MG for general purpose laying down fire, and maybe an SMG or assault rifle for breaching rooms. This has the advantage of giving you a good variety of things and being able to save you a reload if you're caught out of ammo, because then you can swiftly switch to another weapon. It's just like that one guy in that Call of Duty game said, switching to your pistol is always faster than reloading. At least they get knocked down. And thus, this will give you the ability to have a very large amount of munitions on your body at one point, and actually gives you a pretty decent chance, of course, of being able to get a weapon that you really like and are comfortable with. The other philosophy that I've found is to find a gun that you can tolerate and that generally will have some rails on it and ability to customize, and then spending most of your points getting the max customization you can for it, so that way you have the most effective individual weapon that you possibly can. This has the benefit of giving you a general purpose thing and not having to force you to think about so much of what you're using as making sure that you're good at using it. When brought to its logical conclusion, this has led me in one example to having a modernized FAL in which I had a red dot sight, an M203 grenade launcher, and a suppressor. Being able to have these attachments to this thing gave me quite a bit of opportunity. It wasn't like having the individual handheld grenade launcher, where you have to individually switch to it in order to use it, rather than being able to use it on short notice. But keep in mind, fast reaction times are incredibly important, so that split second, even if switching weapons is faster than reloading, will save your life. I had the suppressor, so that way I was able to effectively go anywhere without drawing way too much attention. And of course, the red dot sight is kind of a given, it just makes it easier to aim. I'm a designated marksman grenadier silenced operator thing. This has the other benefits of being able to, especially if you get a weapon you like, maximize your effectiveness on one thing, make sure that you're very fresh with the weapon you're using and you're confident in your abilities with it. But it does come with the cons of you will probably want at least one sidearm, and this sidearm not being used that much will probably mean that you will not really have the different, we'll say, luxuries that you had with the other ones, such as the optic and stuff, and it may be a bit jarring to switch to it, or you may not think to at all, considering you'll spend most of your time using the primary weapon. If you don't have a sidearm, then you're forced to reload every time you're out, and even though, especially with a weapon that can be fired semi-auto, this won't be a problem too often, considering that it only takes one very small slip-up to make you have to restart the entire 30-minute round, you really need to think this stuff through. You get this situation. Yeah, I didn't really stand a chance there. Well, that's it. That's it. This is it, boys. Personally, I found that most of the time I would try to get multiple weapons, and then I'd generally be kind of content when I got something like and I tend to be content. Finally got something like a modernized AK or a pretty decent LMG, and then I'd just keep a lot of other weapons on me for the sake of selling or just in case. One thing else that I will give to the just get a whole lot of gun approach is that all you really have to do is ensure that you have gotten several guns with you and that you keep them with you for the ability to sell them, because then you can get back a 50% return rate, which can allow you to get more things, whereas if you only get one gun, you will end up with less overall supply points to use. This should be kept in mind, but it does not make the second strategy not viable. One other thing I'd recommend doing is when you are actually physically in a take and hold room is that you need to find a specific area in the room. You may have noticed me doing this in a lot of other videos, and in the footage you'll see that I use very similar positions. However, this is for a reason. I will not be using some that you'll see in the videos, is that you want to make sure that wherever you are, only one entrance is actually accessible to you at any given time. This is important because if multiple entrances are facing you, this means that a hot dog can spawn, as they very often spawn very close to entryways, and within 2 or 3 seconds of them spawning, they'll be in the doorway. You won't see them, and they'll kill you. If you only have to worry about one particular doorway and then just kind of a general rest of the room while looking in the same area, you only have to look in one field of view, which will mean you won't have to turn so much to figure out where your enemies are. There are some rooms in which this will be difficult, but generally you want to make sure that your enemies are coming from as few directions as possible, even if it means they get to wander around the room itself a bit, because the worst possible thing that can happen to you is being shot by an enemy that you never even saw, and once again, considering the nation of this mode, it is very possible and nearly likely to happen. Next thing I'll say is that ammo types become more and more important in this hardcore mode. Try not to use anything that doesn't at least have FMJs, armor piercing, or incendiary. I would also recommend, on top of this, using these extra ammo types to where even if you're pretty sure that you've killed something, almost always double tap when they're down on the ground. Another thing that would be a real tragedy to happen to you is you down an opponent, think they're dead, turn away, and then he gets up and shoots you. Double, triple, quadruple tap all of your enemies. Make sure the target is dealt with. Pull a John Wick on them if you really need to, and just turn their head into ground beef. Combined again with another John Wick analogy, in that in some of the movies you'll notice that he'll shoot one guy in the foot, move to another target, shoot him in the head, and then finish off the first guy. Despite being some weird Hollywood trickery, it turns out to actually be a rather effective strategy. If you have two enemies coming to you at the same time and you can manage to disable one temporarily to where they won't be an issue for a little bit, this may sound contradictory, but you can still do this as long as you remember that they're there, and then turn to face another immediate threat and finish them off. Of course, if you can hit the first one with a headshot and finish them immediately, you should do it. But just try to get a hit on them and notice that they're down before switching to the second target. It's probably best for both to just be kind of downed than one completely dead and the other one completely okay. As I've said before, you want to minimize the amount of fire coming at you as much as possible, as the accuracy of the enemies can vary from Stormtrooper to ex-Navy SEAL sniper. And you don't want to be flipping that coin when you don't have to be. A lot of times I'll make recommendations for weapons based on the fun factor of them. Well, in hardcore mode, fun is illegal, so I would recommend almost every time taking an LMG. It does not particularly matter which LMG, though I would recommend in particular something with a very high ammo capacity like the M60, which also fires 308 rounds, meaning that almost every shot will be very effective. Something like the RPD or M249, which are functionally similar, as especially when it comes to an LMG, the optics are not super important, so the lack of modernization on something like an RPD is okay. So don't let an older LMG turn you off. My best run, arguably, was done using a DP28 LMG. It only has 47 rounds and it's nearly 100 years old, but it's so powerful, and on top of this has the advantage that is kind of rare for LMGs of being very easy to reload, as you basically just take off the plate and then slap another plate on there. It really turned out to be a very convenient and high stopping power weapon. In this footage, for diversity of footage, I ended up picking a lot of weapons and using some that were probably not the best use in the time, simply because the better weapon I already had a bunch of footage with. Don't be like me. Take whatever it is that really will allow you to win, unless you're just kind of doing something like I'm doing, or you just want to see if you can. Oh. Well, I mean, I kind of have to use it, don't I? And of course, it's an H3VR video. One that isn't centered on the Wild West with archaic weapons, so of course, you have to keep up those reloads. I bet you thought it wasn't coming because it wasn't in the last video. Well, you're wrong. And all I have to say about reloads is that they have never been more important, because every second counts. Every second is a possibility that you will lose up to 30 minutes of work. So if you don't have your reloads down, I would recommend against even trying this. And I would really try to get good reloads, good marksmanship, and good just general knowledge of at least half the weapons in the game before you give this mode a try, otherwise it'll be incredibly frustrating, as even though I have somewhere around 250 hours in the game, I still had a very, very difficult time getting any measure of success in this mode. I would say that it was very fun and a very different experience from the base game, so I would definitely recommend trying it. Just make sure you know what you're doing first. So, I hope you enjoyed this video. It was a bit of a different one from the other H3VR videos, and if you have other ideas for H3VR videos, other VR videos in general, or other just gaming videos, whatever it is, throw your suggestions to me, and I may answer, and quite possibly do them, as my next video will be based on a commenter's suggestion. So, please consider liking and subscribing, and I will see you in the next video. Das Vidania.